We went back to look at the kings and saw at this time is when King Ahaz brought sin into Judah, basically brought the sin from northern Israel down into Judah and Jerusalem. And now God's judgment is about to come on Judah, not the northern kingdom of Israel, but on the southern kingdom of Judah. At this time in history, and we'll look at this a little bit more detail here, actually both this session and the next, the Assyrian king that became a mighty ruler is King Tiglath-Pileser. You'll find out if you study history that this king actually started as General Pul or General Pula. And he basically did a classic coup d'etat and took over the Assyrian Empire. And when he took over the Assyrian Empire, he changed his name from General Pul to King Tiglath-Pileser. And that's why sometimes you'll read in like 2 Kings, it'll say King Pul. It's actually this King Tiglath-Pileser. And the reason is because before he became king, he was General Pul. And then he changed his name when he had taken over the kingdom. And he was really a mighty Assyrian king. And he is the first one of the Assyrian Empire that went down and actually defeated the Babylonians. He defeated Babylon. And he actually called himself King of Babylon. So he was the Assyrian and he was King of Babylon. That becomes very important in biblical prophecy in Isaiah and Nahum, to understand that they are one and the same at this time in history. King of Babylon is the Assyrian. He was both. King Ahaz at this time used silver and gold from the temple as a gift to Tiglath-Pileser, seeking his help to defeat the northern kingdom of Israel in the Syrian alliance that was at war with Judah. King of Assyria listened to him, and he defeated the Syrians, the Arameans, and put their king Rezin to death, and he carried them away into captivity. The Assyrian kings that followed Tiglath-Pileser was Shalmaneser for about 10 years, and then Sargon. Shalmaneser was the first one to come up against Israel, and then Sargon finished the job and carried away northern Israel into captivity into Assyria as well. And now this is the time that Micah is speaking against Judah. So just to recap here a little bit about the Assyrian Empire, because it's such an important part of understanding these prophets to understand the history at this time. This is the geopolitical makeup of the world at the time of Jonah. Remember, Jonah was sent to Nineveh to tell them to repent. We looked at that last week or 2 weeks ago. And Nineveh repented of their sins. And they didn't destroy Nineveh. That was at this time, around between 795, 770 BC or so, is when Jonah prophesied against Nineveh. Tiglath-Pileser, General Pul, has a coup d'etat over whatever the king was before him, and then he takes over the Assyrian Empire, and he is a mighty military leader. And this is what the land that Tiglath-Pileser took. He took out Babylon, and he took out Syria. So that whole region there became the kingdom of Assyria under Tiglath-Pileser. All right? Then following Tiglath-Pileser was Shalmaneser, and then Sargon. Sargon took the kingdom even further, and he took out Israel, northern Israel. You see that? So this was the empire, the Assyrian Empire under Sargon II, and all that's left down here is Judah. Israel's gone. And this is the time period that Micah is prophesying about. This is where we are in history of what's happening in the world. This Assyrian Empire has been decimating the countries around them. So, Micah now prophesies about the state of affairs in Judah, who had brought the sin of Israel under King Ahaz into Judah and Jerusalem. And it says in chapter 2, verse 1, "Woe to those who scheme iniquity, who work out evil on their beds. When morning comes, they do it, for it is in the power of their hands. They covet fields and they seize them, and houses and take them away. They rob a man in his house, a man in his inheritance. Thus says Yahweh, behold, I am planning against this family a calamity, from which you cannot remove your necks, and you will not walk haughtily, for it will be an evil time. On that day, they will take up against you a taunt and utter bitter lamentation and say, we are completely destroyed. He exchanges the portion of my people, how he removes it from me. To the apostate he apportions our fields. Therefore, you'll have no one stretching a measuring line for you by lot in the assembly of Yahweh. In other words, you're not going to have any property left. You're not going to be a property owner. And the people are going to say, we are completely destroyed. This is the message from Micah to the southern kingdom of Judah. A calamity is coming. You are going to be completely destroyed. Chapter 3, he specifically begins reproving the leadership in Judah. Chapter 3, verse 1. And I said, hear now, heads of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel, is it not for you to know justice? You who hate good and love evil, who tear off their skin from them and their flesh from their bones, who eat the flesh of my people, strip off the skins from them, break their bones, chop them up as for the pot and as meat in a kettle. Now, that sounds pretty bad. I have a feeling, you see, this is a little key. When you're reading the Bible, you see there the word as, and I think the ESV says like. That points out it's a simile. It's a figure of speech. Basically saying the leaders have prepared you for being devoured. Like preparing food for the pot. That's what these leaders have done to the people. They have prepared you to be devoured and eaten up. That's the figure that's used. Pretty strong language. Then they cry out to Yahweh, but he will not answer them. Instead, he will hide his face from them at that time because they have practiced evil deeds. When the people are in destruction, they'll cry out to God, but he's not going to listen because their evil has brought this upon them. Verse 5. Thus says Yahweh concerning the prophets. Now we're specifically talking about prophets who lead my people astray. When they have something to bite with their teeth, they cry peace. But against him who puts nothing in their mouths, they declare holy war. Therefore it will be night for you without vision, darkness for you without divination. Sun will go down on the prophets, and the day will become dark over them. The seers will be ashamed. The diviners will be embarrassed. Indeed, they will all cover their mouths because there is no answer from God. If you're a prophet and it's darkness and there's no vision and there's no answer from God, you're not going to be a very good prophet. And that's what he says. That's what's happening with the prophets who speak. There is no vision. There's no divination. There's no answer from God to these prophets. And then he goes on to these leaders, verse 9. Now hear this, heads of the house of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel, who abhor justice and twist everything that is straight. You twist everything that's straight, you twist it. Who build Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with violent injustice. Her leaders pronounce judgment for a bribe. Her priests instruct for a price. And her prophets divine for money. You got the prophets, the priests, and the kings, the rulers. All of them are doing it for money, for filthy lucre, for covetousness. They're doing these things for financial gain. Yet they lean on Yahweh, saying, is not Yahweh in our midst? Calamity will not come upon us. Verse 12, therefore on account of you, on account of the leaders, the prophet, the king, the priest, all of them, on account of you, Zion will be plowed as a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of ruins. The mountain of the temple will become a high place for a forest. That's strong language. Jerusalem's going to be plowed like a field. Here's what he told them so far. Just a couple things. He said, Jerusalem's going to become a heap. Earlier it said the people will be devoured. They're going to be devoured. He said they're going to say we are completely destroyed. This is utter, complete desolation is what Micah is prophesying. You're going to be destroyed. You're going to be wiped. It's going to be like people are led, they're going to be like food to be taken away and devoured. That's what's going to happen to you. Strong language of judgment and punishment that's going to come upon Judah. Now, we go to chapter 4. And in the midst of this devastating punishment. Let's tell you what's going to happen in the last days, though. He just jumps to the last days. So we've just jumped several thousand years. Chapter 4, verse 1. And it will come about in the last days. This is what the punishment is. This is the judgment that's upon Judah. But in the last days, the mountain of the house of Yahweh will be established as chief of the mountains. It will be raised above all the hills, and people will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For from Zion will go forth the law, even the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. He will judge between many peoples and render decisions for mighty distant nations. They will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they train for war." This is almost word for word the same thing Isaiah was given almost around the same time, the prophecy given to Isaiah. You can look at Isaiah 4, 2 through 4. In the last days, this is the judgment upon Judah, but in the last days, the mountain of the house of God is going to be raised above. All nations will stream to it. The law of Yahweh is going to go out from Jerusalem. And all the nations, they're going to take all of their weapons of warfare, they're going to turn them into tools of agriculture, and they're not even going to learn about war anymore. Amen. The kingdom message, right in the midst of this really harsh judgment, he gives them this great hope. And then in verse 4, regarding this time period when Jerusalem is restored and the kingdom comes, he says in verse 4, "Each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree, with no one to make them afraid. For the mouth of Yahweh of hosts has spoken. Though all people has spoken. Each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree." I thought I'd show you what this means. What it means is a time of peace and safety, the basic essence of that. Remember the time of Solomon? Solomon defeated, he took over the kingdom after David, and they defeated all their enemies. It was not a time of war when Solomon took over. It was a time of peace and prosperity. And here's what it says about that time right after Solomon took over, 1 Kings 4:24. "For he had dominion over everything west of the river, from Tipshah even to Gaza, all the kings west of the river, and he had peace on all sides round about him. So Judah and Israel lived in safety, every man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon." That phrase, under his vine and fig tree, is I guess it's an idiom. It's something understood at that time, representing peace and safety. It's used again later, we'll get to when we go to Zechariah, but here the same term is used in Zechariah about that time. In that day, Zechariah 3:10 declares Yahweh of hosts, "Every one of you will invite his neighbor to sit under his vine and under his fig tree." I was trying to think of a term we might use today. I'm like, I'm going to sit in my backyard under my maple tree with my little campfire, or sit in my house with a nice, cappuccino and fire. Peace and safety. Where I just enjoy life in my home, and that's a great phrase. But that's basically the understanding that when it says here in Micah that each will sit under the vine and fig tree, it's going to be a time of peace and safety, which is not a time right now. Right now in Judah, this is not a time of peace and safety. It's about time for total devastation. So it shows you the contrast. Now, chapter 4, look at verse 5. "Though all the people walk each in the name of his God, as for us, we will walk in the name of Yahweh our God forever and ever. In that day I will assemble the lame and gather the outcasts, even those I have afflicted. I will make the lame a remnant and the outcasts a strong nation. And Yahweh will reign over them in Mount Zion from now on and forever. As for you, tower of the flock, hill of the daughter of Zion, to you it will come. Even the former dominion will come, the kingdom of the daughter of Jerusalem." Beautiful truth. This day is coming when the Lord is going to reign and the former dominion will return to Zion in its glory. Then it goes to verse 9. Now, why do you cry out loudly? Is there no king among you? Or has your counselor perished? That agony has gripped you like a woman in childbirth? Wreathe and labor to give birth, daughter of Zion. Like a woman. I want to point out too, that phrase daughter of Zion or daughter of Jerusalem, it's a personification of Jerusalem and its inhabitants. It can either mean Jerusalem itself, but often it means the people of Jerusalem, the daughter of Zion, the daughter of Jerusalem. Wreathe and labor to give birth, daughter of Zion, like a woman in childbirth. For now, talking about the people of Jerusalem, you will go out of the city, dwell in the field, and you're going to go to Babylon. This is the prophecy against what's going to happen to the people. He told them in the first two chapters 2 and 3, they're going to be devastated, completely destroyed, and you're going to go into Babylon. Now at this time, going into Babylon is going into Assyria. It's one and the same thing. Babylon was part of Assyria. You're going to go over there. All right? Now watch how this builds, because what happens here, and this is why it's almost hard to understand. God is taking us now from this time point in history, okay? And in the next few verses, a short period, we're going to go from this pending judgment that has not yet taken place, but it's about to take place, of Israel going into captivity in Jerusalem, the Messiah being born in Bethlehem, the Messiah defeating the Assyrian, who is the one that's coming out against them, and defeating all nations and bringing them back into safety. What? He covers over 2,700 years in this short little bit here. That's why it's a little difficult to understand, because what is he talking about now, or is he talking about the future? You know, I get the idea that, look, God's got a plan. This is what's going to happen. This is what's going down. In God's perspective, remember he said, to God, you know, a year is like 1,000 years is like a day is like 1,000 years. God sees the future. He sees what's going to happen and what's going to come to pass. And in this short thing, that's what happens here. It's really cool. And you stick with it. It's really amazing. So here's what he says. They're going to go to Babylon, chapter 10, verse 10, but then the second part of this verse. And there, when you go into captivity and you get put in these foreign lands, you will be rescued. Yahweh will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. And now we're jumping to the book of Revelation. Now many nations have been assembled against you, who say, let her be polluted, let her eyes gloat over Zion. But they do not know the thoughts of Yahweh. They do not understand his purpose. For he has gathered them, he has gathered these nations like sheaves of the threshing floor. Arise and thresh, daughter of Zion, for your horn will make iron, and your hoofs I will make bronze, that you may pulverize many people, that you may devote to Yahweh their unjust gain and their wealth to the Lord of all the earth. In this verse, he has taken them from captivity to the time when all the nations will be against her. God's going to gather those nations together like sheaves on the threshing floor, and then the people of God will pulverize them. You get the idea there? Now, I had to grab my head around, what is this threshing floor? I've heard it. So, the threshing floor was this flat area where they would bring the sheaves. The sheaves are the big things of wheat, on the stalk. They would bring the sheaves and they'd put them on this flat area of a threshing floor. Here's a picture. I think this is in Greece, a modern day threshing floor. But I think it's similar understanding. There was this flat area, and you see those bales, those are sheaves of wheat. They would bring, and they'd gather them to the threshing floor. This analogy is against the nations of the world. God's going to bring the sheaves to the threshing floor, all right? The sheaves of grain would be opened up and stalks spread across the threshing floor. Then pairs of donkeys or oxen or some cattle or horses would then be walked around and around, dragging a heavy threshing board behind them. to tear the ears of grain from the stalks and loosen the grain itself from the husks. They would trample. They'd trample the threshing floor. They'd trample the grain. And then, after this threshing process, the broken stalks and grain were collected and thrown up. These guys have these little forks in their hands, these farmers here. Broken stalks and grain would be collected. They'd throw up in the air with a wooden winnowing fork or a winnowing fan. The chaff would be blown away by the wind, and the short torn straw would fall some distance away, while the heavier grain would fall at the winnower's feet, and the grain could then be further cleansed by sieving. John the Baptist makes a similar statement about Jesus, what he is going to do. In Matthew 3:12, it says, his winnowing fork in his hand, and he will thoroughly cleanse his threshing floor. He will gather his wheat into the barn, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. In this analogy, God is telling them, you're going to go into captivity, but I'm going to redeem you. I'm going to bring you back. And all the nations of the world, when I bring you back, all the nations of the world are going to gather against you. I'm bringing them to the threshing floor, and you're going to trample them. This is Revelation. You know what I mean? This is the book of Revelation. This is what happens in the book of Revelation. And it's prophesied here in Micah. In this context. Now, watch as he goes on. Watch this. This is crazy. So, chapter 5, verse 1. Now, muster yourself in troops, daughters of troops. They have laid siege against us. With a rod they will smite the judge of Israel on the cheek. Now, I don't know if this is talking about what happens later to the king of Judah, Zedekiah. He was struck and taken into captivity. Or if this is talking about the judge, Jesus, who was taken before remember they struck him on the cheek? The Pilate soldiers struck him on the cheek with a rod. That the judge of Israel is going to be struck with a cheek. Now, next verse. Follow it. But as for you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you one will go forth to me to be ruler in Israel. His going forths are from long ago, from the days of eternity. Therefore, he will give them up in the time when she who is in labor has borne a child. Then the remainder of his brethren will return to the sons of Israel. Here, God now gives, this is the one that's going to bring this to pass. This one that's going to be born in Bethlehem is going to be the ruler of my people. And he is going to be the one that brings this to pass, this deliverance for God's people. Verse 4. And he will arise and shepherd his flock in the strength of Yahweh, in the majesty of the name of Yahweh his God, and they will remain, because at that time he will be great to the ends of the earth. This one that's coming will be our peace. When the Assyrian invades our land, then he will when he tramples on our citadels, then we will raise against him 7 shepherds, 8 leaders of men. They will shepherd the land of Assyria with a sword, the land of Nimrod in its entrances, and he will deliver us from the Assyrian. What are we talking about? Literally, at this time, the Assyrian is the king of Babylon in the land of Nimrod. And he is coming up against the land. Here in this prophetic message, God says, don't worry, I got one coming. He's going to be born in Bethlehem. And this one that's coming, that is going to trample our people, he's going to defeat. This Assyrian, this king of Babylon, is a type, it's good, for what happens to them, but it's a type for this one that's coming in the future. We know him in the book of Revelation as the beast. We know him in the book of Daniel as the little horn. We know him in the book of Thessalonians as the son of perdition. This one that will rise up against God's people from the area of Babylon in the future. And he puts it all like this is going to happen right now. And yet, 2,700 years, this was about 700 BC, 2,700 years have already transpired. This hasn't taken place yet. But it's wild. And if you can grab your head around it, this is prophecy. This is how God works and how God says things. And everything he says is true. It's absolutely true. They end up going into Babylon into captivity. And there's no reason to doubt what he says about the future in Revelation. It's not also true. And this one was born in Bethlehem that we know is the Messiah. And he is going to come back, and he's going to bring to pass God's will. It's just incredible, incredible. So, verse 7 through 15, you'll see he continues to talk about the evil practices and the vengeance on the nations that have not obeyed. But then you go to chapter 6. This I love, chapter 6. Really, this is, what do we do? How should we respond? What should be our response to such prophetic truth? Micah 6:6. With what shall I come to Yahweh and bow myself before the God on high? Shall I come to him with burnt offerings, with yearling calves? Does Yahweh delight in thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I present my firstborn for my rebellious acts, the fruit of my body for the sin of his souls? He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does Yahweh require of you? Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. What do we do? What should we do? Do justice, love kindness, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And you know what? It doesn't matter if it's the Assyrian, the king of Babylon, the beast. It doesn't matter if it's the current nations of the world. That truth is true all the time. And that is really, that's the message in Micah. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. You do that, all the rest is going to take. That's really the message. Go on in about chapter 6, 9 through 12 is more of this calls to the city. In verse 10 he says, talking about why this evil's come upon them. 6:16. He says, the statutes of Omri, this is why this is happening to. The statutes of Omri and all the works of the house of Ahab are observed. They brought the sin of the Baal worship down into Judah. The statutes of Omri and the work of Ahab. And in their devices you walk. Therefore, I will give you up for destruction, and your inhabitants for derision, and you will bear the reproach of my people. Again, this is going to happen. You are going to be destroyed, completely destroyed. Jerusalem will be laid waste, a ruin, and I'm going to give you up to destruction. That's the message to the people of Judah. Chapter 7, he goes on to talk about the evil. Well, I got this is great, the way this is worded. 7:2, the way this is worded is great. Talking about the ungodliness. The godly person is perished from the land, 7:2. There is no upright person among them. All of them lie in wait for bloodshed. Each of them hunts the other with a net. Concerning evil, look at this. Both hands do it well. They're good with both hands. They can do evil. The prince asks also, and the judge for a bribe. The great man speaks the desire of his soul. They weave it together. The best of them is like a briar. The most upright is like a thorn hedge. So, that's God's opinion of the evil that's going on in Judah at this time. And then you go to chapter 7, verse 18, how this book closes out. Well, 7:7, we got to read Micah's declaration of himself. But as for me, Micah says, I will watch expectantly for Yahweh. I will wait for the God of my salvation, and God will hear me. In the midst of this, I'm going to wait for Yahweh. I'm going to wait for the God of my salvation. And then look how this book closes out. This devastating judgment, great hope, but then a reminder at the end. 7 verse 18. Who is a God like you, who pardons iniquity and passes over the rebellious acts of the remnant of his possession? He does not retain his anger forever, because he delights in unchanging love. He will again have compassion on us. He will tread our iniquities underfoot. Yes, you will cast all their sins into the depths of the sea. You will give truth to Jacob and unchanging love to Abraham, which you swore to our forefathers from day old. Same thing. It's the same thing Jonah knew. Jonah said, I don't want to go speak to those people because if they repent, God will love them. His loving kindness will not bring that devastation to them. Now, this was the coolest thing that in working this, we saw this when we had the Berean night, and it came back to me reading this again. Many times you read these words of the prophets, and you sit there and saying, how come nobody listens? It's like, speak, and they don't listen. Oh, nobody listens to them. But you know what? They listened to Micah. They listened to Micah. Hezekiah listened to Micah. He takes the kingdom. First thing he does, he rids out the idolatry, cuts down all the groves, brings worship back in the temple, tells the priests and the Levites, get your act together, and he takes the kingdom and back into a loving relationship. And you know what? God does not bring about what he said he was going to bring about. You know why I know that? This Bible says so. They do not get destroyed by the Assyrians at this time. But the way it words here, they were supposed to get destroyed. That was their judgment. But Hezekiah went in prayer to God. And this devastation did not come. 100 years later, Judah's in the same boat again. This time the Babylonians are coming down on them. And then there was a prophet named Jeremiah who told the truth. But you know what the leaders did to Jeremiah? Prophet, because we don't like what he's saying. Some of the elders rose up and they said, not so fast on killing Jerry. Okay? Let's remind you of something. And this is what they said to the leaders that wanted to kill Jeremiah. Jeremiah 26:17. Then some of the elders of the land rose up and spoke to all the assembly of the people, saying, Micah of Moresheth prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah. And he spoke to all the people of Judah, saying, thus the Lord of hosts has said, Zion will be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem will become ruins, and the mountain of the house of the high places of a forest. We just read that in Micah 3:12. And then look what it said. Did Hezekiah of Judah and all Judah put Micah to death? Did he not fear Yahweh and entreat the favor of Yahweh? And Yahweh changed his mind about his misfortune which he had promised against them. Woo! There goes the Calvinist thinking, I think, that everything's just etched in stone and it's all going to happen. Don't tell me you can't pray to God. You know, Jeremiah at this time brought God. Jeremiah, come, look, here's a potter. You see that clay? You see that potter make that clay? And he crushes it down, and then he builds it up again. God says, don't you think I can do like the potter does? If I have pronounced evil against the nation, but that nation repents and returns to me, I can forgo the devastation that I caused against it, and I can build them up again. On the same token, if that nation gets haughty and thinks highly of themselves, God as the potter can crush it down. God is sovereign over the nations. I don't understand all these things, but this is wild. The Assyrians were supposed to take Judah out right then and there. And Hezekiah did. He loved justice, he sought mercy, and he walked humbly with his God. And the loving kindness of God, just as it did for Nineveh when Jonah preached, when Micah preached, they repented. And God did not cause this evil to come upon them in the time of Hezekiah. Isn't that great? Makes you feel good that, wow, somebody listened to the Word of God. Praise God. Take a break, and then we're going to look at Nahum for some more exciting stuff. So take a 10-minute break.